are here today to talk about an invasion, an occupation and a war which has ravaged a country whose history is littered with foreign interference. Opposing the war in Iraq did not mean you were automatically pro-Saddam. If anyone was pro-Saddam, that was Ronald Reagan and his administration. Opposing the war in Afghanistan does not mean you were pro-Al-Qaeda. If anybody could be called pro-Al-Qaeda, with all due respect for his current position regarding Palestine, it would be Jimmy Carter's administration and the director of the CIA at the time, Robert Gates, a man who interestingly currently serves as Obama's Secretary of Defense. Opposing the war in Afghanistan does not make you pro-Taliban. If anybody was pro-Taliban, it was Condoleezza Rice and her cohorts at the oil company Unocal. The Taliban themselves were orphans of the Afghan war with the Russians, in which Al-Qaeda were backed by the CIA under both Jimmy Carter's and Ronald Reagan's administrations. Nobody in their right mind could deny the Taliban's hideous oppression of women, but it didn't start on September 11, 2001. Their horrendous regime was in power long beforehand. When Bush and Blair tried to justify this war, all of a sudden women's rights in Afghanistan were so very important. Women in Afghanistan were persecuted long before September 11th and are still subject to persecution on a daily basis under the clearly undemocratic Karzai regime, which the Americans and the British are currently so steadfast in supporting. Condoleezza Rice and Unocal were not concerned about the women of Afghanistan when they were sitting at the table with the Taliban negotiating lucrative oil deals. Besides, in a last-ditch attempt to avoid invasion and regime change at the hands of a foreign power, which is of course illegal under international law, the Taliban offered bin Laden to the Americans. However, despite this, the invasion and occupation still went ahead. As if the American government have a monopoly on morality, as if the American government differentiate morally when looking for business partners. It has never been about creating moral governments. It has been about creating governments that are open to manipulation and are willing to do business. The American government, like the British government, know that Karzai is corrupt. They know they have installed a bunch of warlords and drug lords. Karzai's own brother is a very well-known drug lord with his fingers all over the heroin trade in that country. For the record, in the first year of the occupation, the heroin production in that country increased 1,000% and now accounts for over 90% of the heroin on Britain's streets today. The largest amount of heroin coming out of Afghanistan was from the Helmand province, which interestingly was the area the highest number of British troops were occupying. Make of that what you will. If these occupying forces were really interested in helping the Afghan people, they would put in place a system whereby the opium produced in the country could be used all over the world for strictly medicinal purposes, thus giving the country a massive and legitimate source of income from its poppy fields. There is nothing noble, romantic or righteous about this occupation. While the illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq is widely understood to have been a disaster, there are still those in this country who attempt to argue that this war in Afghanistan is somehow a legitimate war for the good of humanity, as if any government, particularly our government, has ever gone to war in the interests of humanity.